Scary story time. So, scrolling around another forum, looking around for registered nurses. This one's from Fiona Hodson. I've had many weird experiences in the hospitals I've worked in over the years, and some of it probably easily explained, but I'm definitely one of those straight to ghost people. Seeing someone walking up a corridor in the ward on night shifts, and when the ward is locked, staff was busy and no mobile patients, disconnected phones ringing, call bells going off in empty rooms, and end of life patients being quote unquote collected by loved ones. Where I first worked, when I joined the world of healthcare, there was one room in particular that would attract strange occurrences. We'd always tried to put our end of life patients in private rooms to allow privacy for them and their families. We've only had two, as if it was a small ward, so we didn't have a choice but to use this one room at times. I clearly recall a few occasions where we had one end of a life patient seeing things nobody else could. It followed pretty much the same pattern each time. They were showing signs of discomfort or were scared. Then, quite suddenly, they would look over to the left hand upper corner of the room and become much more calmer and smile. There was one lady in particular who said,
"Oh, darling, you come for me."
with the biggest, happiest smile on her face. And another person said,
"It's you. What are you doing here?"
And another, who had been very distressed fighting the end of the life and not having a good response but to pain relief, who suddenly calmed and smiled at the same corner. Pain seemed to vanish. They all passed away within minutes and very peacefully. Family were the end of life patients whenever possible and would sometimes be confused by their behavior. But the lady whose darling had come for her family in the room, and her daughter comforted her own children, and her daughter comforted her own children as she passed away and reassured them that granddad had come to get her and she was with him again. Like I said, we never seen anything ourselves, but that room, we expected things to happen. Only once it was very scary though. An old man was close to the very end, very complicated and accepting of his situation, so none of the typical distress. I wasn't his nurse, but fetched to assist and assumed his pain was perhaps no longer being managed. When I got to the room, his nurse was visibly upset and said,
Please come in with me. I can't go in alone."
not what I expected. We went in, and he was in distress and crying, saying, No,
No, not you. Not you. Leave me. Leave me.
He looked terrified and was staring at the one corner. Whoever had to come collect him was not welcome, not comfort there. The room fell off, and I can't explain it except it was like a static electricity almost cracking. He passed, and it was like I'd gone deaf in that moment. There was no sound at all. Another nurse noticed too, and it lasted a couple seconds, but only the normal sounds of the ward just seemed to vanish. We carried out last offices together and then left the room relieved. The doctor had called family and was looking quite cross. I asked what was wrong, and he said that when he had called off the next kin to tell them the sad news, that the response was, "Good," and they hung up. Another experience with the same room, I come on duty one morning and was walking past the room to go take a handover. As I walked past, the lady in the room called out, "Nurse?"
"Nurse, would you make me a cup of tea?"
I called back, "Yes," as I was early anyway, and turned back towards the kitchen. One of the housekeepers was in there clearing up and asked what I needed. I said, "Oh, it was just a cup for the lady in the cubicle, and it was fine to make it so that she could carry on." She said, "What lady? It's empty." I made the tea anyway and went back, saying there had probably been a new admission as frequently happened. The room was empty though, so the patient was probably in the bathroom. I put the drink down and said, "Your tea is on the table," and headed on to the handover. Sure enough, they report that the lady in the room had passed away just before I arrived and had been collected by mortuary staff. I let them know that she obviously didn't realize she passed away, and she asked me for a cup of tea. One person seemed surprised, but then more superstitious support worker opened the window in that room and let her know she'd passed on. Those are the most memorable experiences I've ever had so far. This next one's from Gia Daniel, who is a registered nurse since the 20th century. My first real nursing job, a patient died. It was not unexpected, but the family members came and we post-mortem care, and then the body needed to be taken to the hospital morgue for the funeral home. For an adult, that required the back elevator to be on the express so that no one would be able to ride. The dead get their last privileges. But it's a two-person job. The nurse that signed the body into the morgue and the security guard who can override the usual elevator functions. And note that this predates COVID-19 by more than just a decade. The body was on a stretcher, and the stretcher on the elevator, me and the security guard. The door closed, and when they opened again, a sighing sound emerged from the body. The security guard shrieked and ran, and he quit his job that night. It was just disconcerting, but just gas escaping, and he obviously didn't know that. I don't blame him for being uninformed, but he was more in danger from superstition than the dead man shrouded on the stretcher. This last story is from Coral Smith, former OR nurse and tissue procurement specialist. I was in the deceased patient's room collecting his belongings so his loved ones wouldn't have to. They had left him just an hour before, and while he was dying, he was very much alive and stable. Less than 15 minutes later, they said goodnight to him, and that's when he passed away. It was expected to be an emotional moment when they arrived back, so I asked to take on that task so that they could just focus on seeing him again and the final goodbye. I'm in the room and it's about 10 p.m. I go to the person's body, gently touching the hand, then start collecting his effects. There's only one light over the bed turned on. So I'm working quietly away, and suddenly the hair on the back of my neck stands up. There's what feels like a body pressed against me, hand on my neck. I freeze and turn around, but no one's there. I go over to the bed again and check for a pulse. Nothing. The cold pressure against me continues to follow me as I walk back to the other side of the room. I had been alone with a lot of bodies before, but this wasn't new to me. I was starting to get anxious, but didn't want any of the other staff to think I was weird or a wuss. So I started talking as if I was addressing a live patient. I said that their family had been called and were on their way, and that I was just packing their bags so that there could be more time to visit. Then, the cold presence left me, and the hand on my neck just let go.